which was not created by the Kulturbund.
But supported me?
No, not even supported. The illusion from which not only the German Jews suffered, but as I said, quite a large part of the free world, was that it would be possible to stabilize the Jewish position in Germany as of 1935, as it was. That means the economic sphere will be still common with the German people. All other spheres will be separate. It was impossible then to foresee what happened afterwards. It's very easy now to say it was an illusion, it was a mistake. As I said before, the mistake was shared by a large part of the free world. And the Kulturbund didn't foster this illusion, didn't foster it. It went its way in slowly Judaizing, if I may use this terrible word, its program and repertoire, in order to make the people more acquainted with Jewish sources and make them love Jewish literature and culture.
You mentioned very clearly, as I already said, that no Jew postponed his migration because he wanted to go to the theater, but maybe that some actors and players and even technique personnel, which were afraid of immigration, were afraid because they didn't know foreign languages, maybe they postponed the immigration because they had a Kulturbund?
That might well be. That might well be. Of course, here you have the following. The alternative was like this: either to have nothing to eat, or to play in the Jewish theater.
Doesn't it in Germany?
Yes, because.
But they could try to find a new occupation in Germany and to change and go abroad.
Well, then in new occupation you have to, of course, to have new training and etc.
Yes.
etc. You see, for an actor it's like this: either you are an actor, or you, I'm sorry, or you are not an actor. An actor is not a profession; it's a calling. You see, I mean, and if an actor cannot act, his life becomes empty. So the Kulturbund really gave more than just bread and butter for the Jewish actors. It made them live on as really what they are, namely actors. And the better an actor is, the less he can change his calling. But it might, this I must concede, maybe here and there, some people, actors, technicians, all these, shall I say, clerical personnel, which was occupied and engaged in the Kulturbund, might have possibly speeded up their emigration had they not been, so to say, busy, productively occupied in work which they liked, which was really there. That is possible. But if you, there are statistics for it. I mean, it's not just very, very few people were caught. Very few people in the end were caught. Out of hundreds of actors, musicians, technicians, which went through these 6, 7, 8 years of the Jewish Kulturbund. In the end,
They left.
Very few were left in Germany, and I mean, each one who was killed is a tragedy, but nevertheless, fortunately, only a small minority was caught and perished in Germany.
Do you remember even situations of pressure on Jewish actors to stay in order to make possible for the play to be continued?
No, there was no such pressure. No, not at all. Not at all.
I understand there was no pressure, but I want really
to
elaborate about that, because...
Yes. it was quite clear. I mean, it was a kind of, how shall I say, an ethical postulate that nobody should be pressured, even let alone not even persuaded to stay if he had a chance to get out.
From the beginning? From 33 or only later?
I wouldn't say 33, no, 33 not, starting at 34, 35, not 33, people were just flocking to the Kulturbund. Although one of the leading actors, the man who played Nathan and Nathan the Wise, left Germany a few weeks after. I think it was called Karsch, yeah. Now, but it was very difficult to find substitutes for the actors and the musicians who left. Very, very difficult. And one of the great problems was to fill the gaps. And a very unfortunate development helped this, unfortunate and tragic, the occupation of Austria, you see, brought new human artistic material to the Kulturbund. The Jewish actors in Vienna were in a terrible state.
And no Kulturbund was established there.
Eichmann didn't allow it. One had to go to Eichmann personally in order to get an actor, actress, or a musician from Vienna to Berlin, only with special permission by Eichmann himself. But he relented in order to have the thing going. But this was, at that time, from 1938 onwards, a kind of reservoir from which the Kulturbund drew
refill,
yeah.
Another question I want to ask you, excuse me, I ask you short questions.
Surely.
Because I read the book and everybody will be able to read
sure,
the book. What was there a change in cultural spheres regarding the relationship to Jews from the Mizrach, from the East? Because the Kulturbund, in the Kulturbund you didn't have very big numbers of Ostjuden.
Well, I must tell you, no, the Jews were not, the actors were not, I don't remember that anybody took the trouble of finding out where a man or a woman was born. I mean, this question didn't arise. You see, there were a few Eastern Jewish actors on the German stage. Alexander Granach, for instance, in Eastern Jew par excellence, was one great actor on the Berlin stage long before Hitler. And everybody would have been very happy had there been many Alexander Granachs at the Kulturbund.
There were no special...
No, this problem didn't arise.
Didn't arise because...
Didn't arise. Believe me, it didn't arise. I never thought of it. Let alone musicians, the orchestra. Who cares where the people came from? We were glad to have some wind instruments, you know. The Jews were very good violinists and cellists, but wind instruments were very rare.
Yes, that's clear. So, how did the Jewish actors and also the Jewish audience react to the German direction or German law that for Jews is forbidden to play German authors and German plays?
Yes, it was.
What was the reaction? Yeah. 1936. I think this must have been a shock.
It was it was a culture shock.
Only culture shock or all this psychological shock?
It was a great shock.
Please tell us a bit about that.
Of course, the band didn't come not so sudden. Everything was gradual. By being gradual, the shock, of course, was softened. It started, and I think I wrote about it. It started with Schiller, I think, and already only applied to German classics in the beginning,
Yes.
to German classics. German modern authors were for a long time still permitted, unless they were anti-Nazis. And anyhow, anti-Nazis, somebody has written something against the Nazis, was anyhow banned. But it was not like this that one day say all German authors, Jews are not allowed to play German authors. It was not like this. It was a gradual development, and therefore the shock was not so deep and great. The same, of course, applies to German composers. You know this.
Mhm.
It was not only authors. It started a long time, much later. I wouldn't say, don't remember at the moment. I think it was 37 or 38 when Beethoven was banned. It was a long time. Of course, it started with Wagner. It's very interesting. The only two countries in which Jews were not allowed to play Wagner was the Jewish Kulturbund under the Nazis and the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra in Israel. Terrible comparison.
Excuse me. The reaction of the people dealing with when they found out that they can't more be involved in German culture.
Well,
They must be really shocked.
well, you see, how shall I say, the end of involvement in Jewish culture, of course, did not start at the Kulturbund. It started beforehand. After all, Jewish authors were not anymore allowed to have German publishers. I wouldn't say now, because only after 1938 German Jews were not allowed anymore to go to a general theater. But this is a different thing. The disengagement from German culture was also very gradual, beyond the realm of the Kulturbund, much beyond the realm of the Kulturbund. After all, Jewish journalists were not anymore active in German newspapers. People used to read the Berliner Tageblatt, you know, one of the leading papers in Germany, and there was the editor-in-chief was a Jew, and the editor of the feuilleton was a Jew, and of course they knew this, and as far as the exclusion of German authors from the Kulturbund goes, I think the shock was more within the Kulturbund than outside.
Outside wasn't felt.
I don't think that by that time the general Jewish public was much affected by it. I don't think so. Whether they there was a famous Jewish Hungarian author, famous for his comedies and his wit, Molnar, Franz Molnar, and he was brilliant. His plays were allowed, of course, were permitted. They didn't care whether they saw Molnar or a German a comedy author. For them it was not a question of principle. What was the shock was, how shall I say, was really contained, was felt by those who had to build up a repertoire, who was really within the Kulturbund. The shock was great. The audiences didn't mind anymore at that time whether they saw Jewish authors only. Of course, they were also allowed to see non-German authors. Don't forget it. Priestley, the British dramatist, playwright Priestley, was prepared to forego all his royalties and just to let the Kulturbund play his plays, because the transfer of royalties was not allowed. So whether they saw Priestley or Molnar and Molnar or somebody else, they didn't mind. There was no shock outside the Kulturbund.
There was no shock outside. That's very interesting, you see. So, and from here we come directly to another question, that there wasn't here a certain kind of escapism from German culture to European culture in order to keep and in order to preserve the, I would say, not the assimilation, but the integration of the Jews
to Europe.
To German culture in Europe discourse, European discourse.
Well, I think it was, how shall I say, the Jews didn't want to leave Europe.
Yes, that's what I think.
That is right.
Not only Europe, also not Germany.
I'm not so sure whether it was Germany, but there. And understand
it's understandable. I don't blame.
They didn't want to leave the tradition, the mentality, the culture in which they were brought up, and their fathers and their forefathers, in which they were in Europe, Western Europe. And I wonder whether it was only Germany. After all, they were very close to the British, to British English literature. We were very close to the French. You must imagine Germany happens to be this geographical situation of Germany had always the result that it was open to the influences of French and British culture. And they didn't want to, they were hanging to their European heritage, to their cultural heritage. And of course, and by their teeth. And for this, of course, the Kulturbund was one of the means. Because there was, what was the substitute? Where was the Jewish culture? Where was the tradition of the Jewish theater? Where were the great Jewish novels?
There were none.
All right, that's the answer. You see, there was not the alternative, here Europe, there Jewish culture. There was no alternative. There was either Europe or nothing. And therefore
they escaped into the European culture.
Yeah, escaped into European culture.
Translated into German.
As far as they could, but there was not much. I mean, they were not permitted anymore. So all right, so they went. They listened to. There was still Shakespeare, and there was Priestley, and there was. I don't remember anymore. At the moment, Ibsen was a great renaissance of Ibsen and Strindberg. Afterwards.
Scandinavian,
afterwards. Die have nur ein volle Menschenleben. I mean, it's full. I mean, and what, as I said, there was nothing apart from parents.
You would say that if they couldn't play Schiller, they tried to find the same ideas in Ibsen.
Yes, surely. Schiller they were not permitted to play, but Europe which is immense wealth and tradition of literature and drama was how shall I say, the spiritual, won't say savior, but anyhow the spiritual refuge.
You said in your book, and you stated, that the Kulturbund tried to preserve the completeness of the Jewish human being. You said it. You think, did Kulturbund succeed in that?
Well, as a matter of fact, I don't recall it, but I don't deny it.
You stated
yes,
that.
Yes, all right. If you say so, well, I tried to.
In this terrible situation.
Yes, in this terrible situation, see, it did the following thing. It softened the blow, and by this, it, so to say, succeeded in maintaining the mental and emotional balance of the German Jews. Because to be excluded from one day to the other from German culture into nothingness Must have been a shock. I don't know what would have happened. So there.
It happened in Poland later.
It happened in Poland, but of course was all. Yes, we cannot gauge at the moment the consequences of it because of the physical destruction which so quickly followed. It happened in Vienna.
In Vienna.
It happened in Vienna.
And in Prague.
Yes.
Because Prague is also German. The Jews of Prague were had German culture.
Of course. There's one great difference in that I must tell you, and don't forget it, because it's of his.
Go ahead.
Yes, because it's really of a historical impact. The German Jews had to live under Hitler for 8 or 9 years till they were physically, as a mass, physically attacked, assaulted. In Vienna and in Prague, the process was quite different. It was from today till tomorrow. The whole Viennese catastrophe lasted a year, half a year. Prague, just the same in Prague. But here was a question of years and years and years under Nazi domination and still maintaining their economic life, their physical existence. They still had their they still had their houses, their luxurious flats, apartments. You cannot compare it. Because everybody thinking now of Nazis and Jews, what is it? The Holocaust. Nobody, very, very few people deal with the period from 1933 till 1940, well, let us say 1939. And this is where the Kulturbund comes in. And therefore one cannot compare it with Vienna, one can't compare it with Prague, and definitely not with Polish Jewry. 8 long years. And now I make a statement, the fact that more than half of German Jews could save their lives by emigrating orderly, without panic, saving whatever they could, taking with them whatever the authorities permitted, was due to the fact that German Jewry was well organized, that also, and I don't want to exaggerate its importance, that also there was a Kulturbund which took care of their emotional, mental, and cultural needs. In other words, the Kulturbund was among the Jewish organizations in Germany which saved 250,000 lives.
Okay. I have now another question.
Please.
Dealing with the so-called, what you already mentioned, that the Jews were claimed that they were before 1933 dominating the German culture. Verjudung der deutschen Kultur. When they were claimed, how did the Jews react?
Before 1933.
After 1933.
After 1933.
Maybe you may compare before 1933 and after 1933, if this facilitates your reaction.
Yeah. Well, the fact is, and it cannot be denied, that the influence of Jewish intellectuals on the literary and scene in Germany, both as far as book publishing goes, the theater, the music life, the press, in Berlin, especially in Berlin, but also in Frankfurt and very few other cities, not all over Germany, but 3 or 4 cities. But among them Berlin, and Berlin was, of course, dominant, influenced the German cultural scene to a large extent, to an utmost extent, like Paris, the French scene, like London, the English scene. Out of proportion to their numbers. I don't want to go so far, but the people said there were also a kind of, cliques which stuck together and didn't let anybody else in, no outsider. The outsiders happened to be German authors, who had different philosophies and political things. Anyhow, there's no doubt that the German Jews were very influential in the cultural scene before Hitler. As I said, far above their numerical strength. How the Jews reacted to it? Well, very, very funnily, very tragically, I don't know. Before Hitler, they denied it. They came with some figures and they denied it. It was a kind of, the fight against anti-Semitism had sometimes very strange features. After Hitler, the Zionists, the Jüdische Rundschau, which was the press organ of the Zionist organization, conceded that it was the case. Conceded. And they said in a very, how shall I say, very reserved language that it is to some extent the case that the Jews were, so to say, were not discreet enough and overstepped their bounds and tried to achieve positions which maybe they should have gone, so to say, foregone. The Zionists admitted it.
The TV people?
The TV people, I think, at that time they
didn't
shirked
react.
the question. No, they didn't react anymore. No.
A very sad reaction, I would say. Don't think so?
It is. Yes, the trouble is this. It happened to be true. It happened to be true. If you look through today the volumes of history or the press, it's cannot be denied. Cannot be denied. And but I only want to limit it to one thing. It applies to Berlin and a few cities. But for instance, the German press was the multitude of thousands of papers was not Jewish apart from 3 or 4 leading newspapers in Berlin and Frankfurt. But the Berlin stage, the Berlin theater, was of course, from the producers and directors down to the last actor. Jews dominated the German stage, and there were also people who maintained that it was difficult to find a publisher when you were not a Jewish author. But
couldn't be denied. Now, an additional question is, did the Kulturbund try to create a new Jewish identity in Germany after Hitler? A religious one, a national one, or any kind of identity, any kind else.
Yes, you're correct. I know, I understand your question. I think the Kultur knew its limits. It was not one discussed. There was discussion, a dispute, controversy, whether one could altogether create a Jewish culture in Germany.
Not culture, only identity, an identity.
Whether could create whether could establish an identity. I think the Kulturbund resigned itself to the fact that it could help Jews by making them conscious of being Jews, being proud of being Jews, being to make them to some extent acquainted with Jewish, not just with plays, but they were looking for Jewish composers and for Jewish music. There was this large network of lectures. They tried to bring back Judaism to German Jews. I mean, it's history, ethical values. But they knew that they couldn't establish an identity. They were just either educating them, I mean in the sense of a large interpretation of the word education, or just helping them to endure by giving them, so to say, escape into the realm of art, music, theater. These two things. There was no attempt of establishing a Jewish identity.
Zionists tried.
Zionists tried to make them conscious Jews. National. Yes.
Kurt Blumenfeld.
Yes, of course, but it was, you see, it was...
What is the difference between the two trends, let us say?
Because, you see, the Kulturbund had not the means. There was no... You cannot make a Jew national by listening to Gustav Mahler.
But had also lectures.
Yes, only lectures, you see. There's only lectures. You can... Because the theater and the concert hall and the art gallery didn't help you couldn't make you a national Jew. Only lectures. For lectures, as a matter of fact, you didn't need the Jewish Kulturbund. The Zionist organization had a huge network of lectures. There was a Jewish Lehrhaus for adult education.
You mean Buber's Lehrhaus?
Buber's was the idea of Buber, but he was not active in it. But you see, that was not the actual field of the Kulturbund. The Kulturbund had lectures, but it was not its actual means, namely music, theater, art, can't contribute very much to because there were no Jewish plays which could, you see, think of it, you went to the theater and suddenly you could be proud of being a Jew. No, there was no such play. It doesn't exist. It didn't exist. I don't know whether it exists today, but it didn't exist then anyhow. So the Kulturbund couldn't fill this function.
Do you think that Kulturbund couldn't really develop or influence Jewish thought?
Well, on one or two occasions maybe after, you see, maybe after Jeremiah's by Stefan Zweig or here and there. But altogether it couldn't influence it because there was no sources which helped the Kulturbund to build up its program.
Excuse me, was there a certain step when the heads of the Kulturbund, let us say Kurt Singer and all the others, admitted the failure of the German-Jewish symbiosis. Did they, once they talked about der letzte Akt der Tragödie Symbiosis.
Yes.
Did they admit it once?
Yes.
When did it happen?
Again, it was not from today till tomorrow. It was when the, you see, after 1936. 1936 was were the Olympic Games in Berlin. And after that, the situation became more and more grave. And the bans and orders, even for the Kulturbund, became more and more stringent.
More and more?
Stringent. And then it became, not from one day to the other, it became obvious that this was the last act of what was once the German-Jewish symbiosis. And it fell into parts and disintegrated. And 1937, 1938 were very difficult years, and it was a question of, for the Kulturbund, of surviving altogether. The pressure became more and more, became immense. And so that was the Nieuwd, but not from one day to the other.
And you said in your book, das Theater muss bekennen. That is a kind of admittance. That was the answer. So you didn't deny this theater has a very important impact on thought of people.
Of course, theater. If you have a message, really the theater is a proper forum for it. How better can you
influence
people to get home a message? I mean, and by all the paraphernalia of it.
So the Kulturbund came to a step, 1938, that its theater didn't have a message anymore.
Right, you are absolutely. It started with a message. It happened to be the wrong message. It was Nathanweise, you know. Still the good old days where one thought Jews and German could live together only if they recognized that they're being, I don't know, children of God, you know, both of them. It started with a message and ended with a catastrophe, yes, because it couldn't anymore fulfill its function. Theater in such a situation must have a message, and it couldn't deliver its message, its Jewish message, because it had not there were no means for a theater to do so. That's it says that. There was no Hebrew theater which could be translated, Hebrew drama, I mean. Hebrew plays. There were the Eastern European plays didn't meet the situation.
Didn't appeal to the German audience?
Didn't appeal to the German audience. As far as they were funny by Sholem Aleichem, fine, they laughed. But as I said, Peretz, the golden chain was a fiasco, and they didn't appeal. It was a different mentality. It didn't fit the or shall I say, the political and mental needs and situation of the German Jews. Had there been a playwright, well, anyhow, he wouldn't have been allowed to be performed. I mean,
would Stefan Zweig be a playwright?
Stefan Zweig at that time, this Jeremiah's happened to be. To fit the emotional situation of the Jews. But unfortunately, Richard Baer Hoffmann didn't, for personal reasons, didn't allow his plays to be performed. He was probably rightly so afraid of being then arrested himself in Vienna. He was at that time in Vienna. It was very, very difficult to persuade any of the living Jewish authors to be performed by the Kulturbund, because they thought that such an publicity would endanger their own existence.
And now I come to a very, I would say, terrifying point of my questions. It means the point after the Kristallnacht, when the Germans forced the Kulturbund to play. It must be really a terrible situation, because almost no audience, and people were really forced to play. Doesn't this kind of German orders creates the impression that we have the first act of the Jews playing violin in front of the dead camps?
Yes, it was the overture to it. There's no doubt about it. But there was no alternative.
This was an order.
That was an order.
They didn't do it anymore.
That was an order. You see, there are two periods of the Kulturbund.
Yes.
Voluntary playing and the playing by order. The end of the voluntary work ended with the Kristallnacht, you see.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened after the Kristallnacht, of course, saved the lives of the actors and the lives, I don't know. Anyhow, they were released from concentration camps. Not everybody died at the time in concentration camp. That came only later. The Kulturbund at that time made it possible for some people to get released from the concentration camp, but that was already quite an eerie and ghost-like life which the Kulturbund then had to conduct. It was different from before.
It was already the period of a so-called Reichsvereinigung.
Right, you are. The Reichsvertretung was in the Reichsvereinigung.
It means if we can say that this kind of life, or not of life, of action, of activity of the Kulturbund reminds us of the forced playing in the dead camps. It means also this organization, the roof organization, reminds us of the later Judenrede in the East.
Definitely. You see, after the Kristallnacht, the Kulturbund became the only organization for any cultural activity. Suddenly all Jewish private publishers had to cease.
Yes.
Only the Kulturbund was allowed to publish books. The Jewish press was banned and had to and ceased to exist, apart from one weekly which was part of the Kulturbund. Suddenly the Kulturbund became this roof organization which because by then the Judenpolitik of the Nazis had crystallized, you see, and they wanted everything under one roof in order to get to make it for them easier to deal with them. This, I think one should really differentiate between the Kulturbund from 1933 to 1938 and what happened afterwards. It unfortunately is the same name, but it was not anymore the same organization.
You were talking about the gradual change of development of the Judenpolitik.
Yes.
But I understand that in 1938 this changed.
This changed, yes. I don't know whether by then already the final solution was already blueprinted and planned. I don't know at the moment, but it changed completely. By that time, one had the impression: if you stay here, you will be killed, but you are still allowed to get out. Emigration at that time was forced, was not, if I say encouraged, it would be an understatement. Forced by all possible means, because the people who after, during the Kristallnacht and after the Kristallnacht were arrested and put into concentration camps were allowed to get out if they could prove that within a month or within a fortnight they would leave Germany. That means if you leave Germany, if you can prove that you leave Germany, you're a free man and get out. If not, it's at your risk.
Mm-hmm. So you would say you couldn't really call the activity of the Kulturbund after the Kristallnacht as an activity done by free will?
No, not at all, not at all. I would even go so far as to say it was done against the free will of the people. The people didn't want to go on.
You were still in Germany?
Yes, I was still in Germany till June 1939. So I was present. The people were terrified when they were ordered to open again and to play again. It was 6-7 days after the Kristallnacht. They thought they couldn't even stand it. They couldn't go on, and even after the shock of Kristallnacht, and suddenly